efforts to build various communities of practice in the region. I have just a few housekeeping pieces to mention before we begin. As you will notice, you are all currently muted. In just a moment, I will unmute everyone. So if someone is on the phone but for some reason cannot access the webinar component online, please speak up at that time, and I'll take down your information in order to troubleshoot offline once we get going. Then before beginning again, I will mute everyone once more. If you have any issues during the webinar, please get my attention by either virtually raising your hand. So in that little window that you've got open with the chat and everybody's names and stuff, there's a little hand that you click on, and that would get my attention. Or if you'd rather, you could also just chat to me in the chat box, letting me know what the problem is, and we can figure that out throughout the webinar as well. So now I'm going to unmute everybody. So now would be the time to speak up if you're on the phone but not on the webinar piece. Is anybody having any issues? Okay, so I'm going to assume everything's going well for most people. If for some reason you're on the phone and you can't speak up, or if you're on the webinar component but not on the phone, you can get a hold of me by emailing me at the selfmanagement@kchd.ca email, which should be in the reminder emails that were sent to you earlier today and yesterday. So you can just email me there, and I'll get that email while we're going through things, and I'll troubleshoot with you offline at that time. So we will be answering questions as we go through the webinar. So if you have any questions, just type it into that chat box I was talking about earlier, and I will make note of it, and I will bring it up during a natural pause, and then I can unmute the person who asked it so that there can be a bit of a dialogue. And if it comes up that it looks like it should be something that we open up to the whole group, then I can unmute everybody for a larger discussion if we feel that's the thing to do. And again, at the end, we'll also have a bit of a question and answer period. So if you don't think of something right away, but you want to bring it up at the end, you can do that as well. And again, to ask the question, you would just go into the chat portion. Now, if you would like a printout of the slides with space beside them for notes, there's that available for downloading from our website. The direct link to get them was provided in those same reminder emails that were automatically sent to you yesterday and earlier today. Lastly, we would like to mention that we are having an upcoming Choices and Changes workshop on February 20th in Smith Falls. Please feel free to refer to your colleagues who may be interested in the workshop. Or if you're attending these webinars and have yet to take a Choices and Changes yourself, we highly recommend that you do take one, as it would be of great benefit. If you can't make it to the Smith Falls one, please keep an eye on our calendar tool on our website, which lists all of our upcoming workshops. And our website is livingwellseontario.ca. Now I would like to present our speaker for our 7th webinar, Social Work Generalist Session, Tools and Self-Management, Carla Vanderwood. Since opening its doors in 2010, Carla has worked as a social worker at the Belleville and Quinte West Community Health Center. In her current role with this agency, she provides supportive counseling to individuals, couples, and families, as well as facilitates various community groups and works in partnership with community members and community agencies to establish and expand services for various vulnerable populations. She grew up in Windsor, Ontario, where she completed her bachelor's and master's degrees in social work. So now I'm going to pass on the screen to you, Carla.
Perfect.
Shortly to be able to see her presentation, and she'll take us through it.
There you go. I hope everybody can see this okay. Thanks for everybody who's joined the webinar today. It's, as a social worker, something I'm very passionate about, is encouraging clients to manage their health and their own care. And there's some more practical tools, as well as just some general thoughts and questions that I've come into through my work so far with the Health Center and with other agencies. So just to sort of frame the conversation and the presentation for starters, how I thought I'd do that is just very similar to how I approach clients in an initial appointment. And that's basically by saying what we talk about today is just information, and what you do with it's up to you. So I just look at myself as a trained resource person, and it's clients and the people who are utilizing the information that I have at my disposal that make change or significant change to clinical practice. So thank you for having me today. And just so people are aware as well, this presentation is based on my experience as a generalist social worker, research literature, and I'll specify any biases I have. So yeah, let's just try to keep it fun and light. So just a snapshot of what to expect here. I'll talk about self-management and social work generally, some factors influencing the social worker's ability to support client self-management, because there are a few. Probably more than I've mentioned here. There's also factors that influences clients' ability to self-manage themselves. And then what I'll run through is sort of what an initial session might look like that supports self-management, as well as some more concrete tools or considerations. So self-management and social work, actually, the two are very closely linked. That very long acronym there for people who aren't social workers who may be dialed in today is the Ontario College of Social Workers and Social Service Workers. And as a member of that college, I am obligated to follow their code of ethics. That code of ethics is the one that's currently in place, is from 2005. And what it talks about is client self-determination. And what that is it's considered a core social work value. It refers to the client's right to direct their own care without interference from others, including practitioners, other people in their lives. And that is something that is a value under respect for the client's inherent dignity and worth. And that's sort of very dynamic in the fact that the clients, because an individual does have worth, their opinions and their right to determine their care does also. So now that has a direct influence on a social worker's practice. However, also the agency you work for as a social worker would as well. The agency I work in is a community health center. The Ontario Association of Community Health Centers has something they refer to client-centered care. It's in their model of health and well-being. And what it says is that our centers are all client-centered. Everyone participates collectively in decisions about their health care. They work in a respective collaborative relationship with their community, including the providers providing support. So when I think about how self-management and for social workers in Abstinence-Based Addiction Agency, or CAS, would work, there are agency mandates that could really influence how much you're able to involve clients in decisions about their care. So that's something to be considered that really does influence social workers' autonomy. And then, although this is kind of a quirky picture to put here for social worker style because it's more than just clothes, it's more about your practice style. That's based upon your own experiences, your own training. Every school of social work across Canada or in the US and other countries has their own sort of model of social work that they teach from. Like was mentioned earlier, my training is a generalist degree. The way that was described to me was it's a mile wide and an inch deep. So I have a lot of training in different models of social work. So an awareness of what an anti-oppressive framework would look like, what a feminist framework would look like. So when I'm working with individual clients, what that does, it allows me to see people through different lenses, and they're presenting concerns through different lenses. So it gives me more options in terms of tools to pull from. Okay. And then we move into the factors influencing clients' ability to self-manage. There's a little picture to the right of that slide, which is the stages of change for people who aren't familiar with those. It comes basically from the addictions field. That's where its roots are. And the authors of this, Prochaska and DiClemente, talked about how clients present in healthcare settings at different stages of readiness to make change. There is a bit of an acronym that I learned, at least, to remember this, and it's because it has its roots in addictions. We always said PCP in the AM, so pre-contemplation. You're thinking about making change. Contemplation, preparation, action, and maintenance. Now, this model here also includes relapse, which I've noticed in newer readings on the stage of change model. And so wherever clients are at in that is really going to influence their ability to self-manage and influence the information you give to them. In the cited works at the end of this presentation, there's actually a very useful table under the Murray, Sutto, Hole, Hale, and Amari link, I believe. And that talks about the stage of, it describes each stage of change in a table. It also describes sort of indicators of people being in certain stages of change. So the yeah, but clients are usually pre-contemplative, contemplative around there. And then it also matches the stage of change with tools you might use or an approach you might take with that client. So for example, if someone comes in at a pre-contemplative stage, you're just kind of giving information and feeling them out and just being a neutral sounding board. It's not, they're not in an actions phase. They're not ready to necessarily dive right in and get to work. So if you do approach things like they are in that phase, it's going to make it very frustrating for both parties. The client's cognitive functioning, as well as what I should have put there, the mental health concern they may be presenting with, would also influence their ability to self-manage. And, oh no. So that does not mean, I don't mean to say there that an individual's cognitive functioning would stop them from being able to self-manage. It just means you may have to be more creative with your interventions and how you approach the client's presenting concern. And then you should always sort of keep in mind the current life circumstances of the client. So any barriers they may be experiencing that would be definite stressors that would take them away from the ability to self-manage, and then as well their strengths and resources that they have at their disposal. So but before we get started into the kind of the meat of today's presentation, I just want to remind people to be creative. Because social work is considered a social science, I always look at it as much as it's sort of art as much as it is science. So you're really creating something pretty amazing with a client, and that allows you to have a lot of fun with it, I think. So it doesn't have to be dry and dark as people may think it would be if you were going to see a counselor. So that's just something to think about. So typically this sort of gets into what an initial session might look like. And one of the first questions I ask when I meet a client is, what brings you here today? I think a lot of different disciplines ask that question, and for me what it does is it assesses the motivating factor. The language here for me has really been key. So for those who don't know, there are two types of motivation, intrinsic and extrinsic. Intrinsic is anything that sits within the client that motivates them to be here. So when I hear, I feel like my depression's taken hold of my life, that tells me that they want to be here and perhaps to deal with the depression or maybe a cause of the depression, and a contributing factor. The other type of motivation is extrinsic, which does really influence the client's position in how dedicated they might be to the therapeutic process and their ability to self-manage. So extrinsic motivation comes from completely outside of them. It's usually the clients that are mandated for counseling by the courts or their primary health care provider in some cases, or partners. Partner-mandated clients do come in quite a bit, and it usually sounds something like, when I ask that question, what brings you here today? Well, my partner says that I need to work on my anger, or my doctor said that my mood's an issue. That prompts me to ask them, well, do you think that's an issue? And just sort of engage them in that process. So what I also do with people who are new to counseling, and one of the attachments that I hope everyone received, is I go through a consent for counseling. That's something that we do with all our clients who are new to counseling services with social workers at the health center. And it basically outlines what counseling is, how it's different from talking to a friend or family member. It outlines a confidentiality and duty to report, as well as the counselor's responsibilities to the client and the client's responsibility to the counselor. So we're both in agreement that we're going to be accountable to one another. So missed appointments and stuff like that are listed. And it also lets the clients know that they're in the driver's seat and they're really in charge of what their care looks like, whereas some people come into counseling and they may have had different experiences or watched a TV show where they think, I'm going to prescribe a certain plan of care, and they're just going to follow that. There's no missed step in their understanding that they determine what their care looks like. I just provide options and information. And then it talks about the delivery or the service duration and frequency of appointments as well. So developing that collaborative care plan. Now, I hope if everyone did not get that document, I can make sure that it does get distributed. And you can feel free to use and modify as you'd like at your agency. Now, for those who aren't in the social work field, I would then go through a holistic assessment or a biopsychosocial spiritual assessment. Now, this sort of talks about, very generally, about what I would be looking at in exploring with a client in a first appointment. However, it doesn't always, that's a lot of ground to cover. So it doesn't always happen in a first appointment. Sometimes it can be the first 2 or 3. But while we're exploring this, I'm getting to know the person, and they're getting to know me as well as a therapist or counselor. And that's, like I said, very simplified, but for example, if you look at under social assessment, there's social supports there where I would talk about partners, friends, family. I would also look at, go a bit deeper into that, look at history of violence and that sort of thing. So it's not completely detailed, but just for the sake of the presentation, I thought this would be helpful. And because I just want to draw your attention to the bottom corner of this slide, because we're looking at self-management, it's important to look at the client's strengths, where they're at, and building on those with our plans. So I always ask questions about what they feel they're good at, what they're proud of, and build upon those pieces. And then when wrapping up the initial appointment, typically what I'm doing is providing a really quick snapshot. So I'm trying to think back to a recent appointment and what that might look like, to give you an example. So a recent client I saw had talked about anxiety closely linked to their workplace, and some issues with alcohol. And so my wrap-up would be, so what I heard you say is your main reason for counseling is that you're having some concerns about anxiety. You mentioned your workplace is the main source of that, and the primary way you deal with this is by drinking alcohol. Is that accurate? If they say yes, that gives us the opportunity to say, okay, what out of that do you want to work on? And they consider goals at this point. And that sort of brings us into the toolkit. And the first piece being goal setting. Oh, well, before I move on to that, actually I switched the order of things. So I will get to goal setting. Best practices. So when you are considering, when you're starting work with a client, you need to consider best practices, not only professionally, but also best practices for the client as a social worker. And then as well as their needs, strengths, abilities, in matching that to a therapeutic approach. A question I always ask myself is, does the approach that I'm using really provide the client with the tools to use outside of the appointment? Does it teach them skills that they can, they don't need to have regular appointments to utilize so that they can self-manage? What that does is it's about, and what it helps to do is demystify the work that we do, whereas some therapeutic approaches rely on consistent appointments with a client, with a therapist, for the client to feel grounded and like they're able to cope. And that would not necessarily be the best approach to use if you're trying to encourage client self-management. Another question I ask myself is, who's the expert in the model that I'm using? So an example is dialectical behavioral therapy. Someone had once described that therapeutic approach to me as, I accept you as you are, well, I'm going to push you to change. And I think if you use, and this is my own bias, you can use dialectical or behavioral therapy or DBT strategies with a client in a way that encourages self-management, but you need to be mindful of how you do that. And that's where the art piece comes in that I mentioned earlier, I think. So I'm just going to move on to the goal setting piece that I mentioned earlier. So we're into our toolkit. And so I've added a few different examples of ways to goal set with clients. This one is sort of something actually that I've recently taken on and is included in one of the cited works as well in the back. So I believe it is under the 4th cited work. And so basically, once a client sets a goal or chooses a goal or focus for the session and the work together that you would do, I ask the client, okay, let's just have a brainstorming exercise and let's name all the different ways that you think you could improve your mood. So one being medication, sleep, exercise, nutrition are also listed there, and then they can add as many as they want. We're not choosing exercises or skills or tools that they feel good about. It's just all the tools that they know exist at their disposal. And then what I've done with people is we then color in those circles. So green meaning that's a go, I'm comfortable, I'm 100% comfortable with using that tool. Yellow, there's a little bit of trepidation. I need to really kind of learn more about this. And red is like no-go. Don't want to explore medication, for example, to improve my mood. That's a really common one that comes up here. So I often share this exercise with the rest of the team that works here because I do work with the people's doctors, nurse practitioners quite often. And the doctors and nurse practitioners may look at things and say, we really think medication would benefit this client. And if the client wants to choose another tool, it's helpful for the provider to see, hey, you're both working on the same thing, improving the client's mood and the quality of life. It's just you're going about it differently. So that has been a really helpful tool in encouraging the client to choose something that works for them and also communicate with the provider that, hey, you're both working on the same thing. It's just, it looks a bit different. which encourages client self-management and them being in charge of their care within a larger team. Now, the other more well-known tool for goal setting is SMART goals. So SMART being an acronym for specific, measurable, action-based, realistic, and timely. And so an example of a SMART goal that I've done recently might be if a client comes in and they say that they had an awful checkup with a specialist. They were told that they need to exercise more because they're at risk for some chronic diseases. And so we talk about what exercises they're comfortable with, and they say yoga. So then we can break it down and say, okay, how many times a week do you want to do yoga? So let's tackle the specific part first. They're going to, and this person, for example, said, I'm going to do it 2 times a week. I have a little DVD already that I picked up from the dollar store, so that DVD lasts for about 20 minutes, so I'm going to do that 20-minute DVD twice a week. And then this particular person, sometimes people set days because of scheduling, just to keep on track, but this person chose not to set days to be more flexible with their lives. Now, measurable, that also sort of includes the piece we talked about. So what are you doing, how often, when, in there. Action-based, meaning are there steps that you need to take before you put your goal into motion. So if you don't have the supplies to do yoga, if you've never done yoga before and you don't have some kind of instructional tape or some kind of guidance on how to do that, that would be really difficult. So we look at steps to achieve the goal that need to be taken. And then is it realistic? So that's why I sort of put in the 3 bears over there, is you don't want a goal to be too easy. You don't want a goal to be too hard. You want it to be kind of in that sweet spot in the middle, just right. So it needs to be challenging, but not too much so, where the client feels overwhelmed. And that's just basically a yes or no answer. If you answer yes, then you set a time frame for that to happen in. So usually, because I see people once every 2 weeks, they set a 2-week time frame, and then we check in the following appointment. And then the last goal setting exercise that I tend to do with people is I draw a starting line, a finish line, and sort of a winding road between the two. It usually looks like a wobbly line and not very artistic, but what it does is it allows myself and the client to talk about recovery as a journey, and that if you've ever been on a road trip before, you don't sort of go without taking any breaks. You go at your own speed, and you do take breaks to use the washroom, to get meals, whatever. And so recovery kind of being the same way. You need to take breaks and have points where you know you've stopped off and you're making change. So I ask clients if, for example, they were looking at decreasing depression, what are some signs or spots along the way that you know you're making progress? One for clients might be that they get out of bed earlier. Another one might be that, let me see, that their appetite returns. It's very subjective to the person, and that really allows them to provide me with some markers of change so that I can encourage them to look back at evaluating their progress as they move forward. So that's sort of it for goal setting. If there's no questions so far, I'll move on to talking about the second tool, which is understanding your diagnosis. I was trying to think of how to talk about this, and what I came up with was sort of another car example actually. So recently I went on a trip. I was expected to do a 5-hour drive, and on the 401 I ran out of windshield wiper fluid. So as a younger woman who had never popped the hood of my car, which I was calling the trunk at the time, I really didn't know how to do this. So I had to really rely on somebody else to teach me how to, like actually literally a perfect stranger to teach me how to fill my windshield wiper fluid once I pulled off into a stop, one of those en route stations. So I guess the way I was thinking about this was, if I know how the car works, I'm better able to manage that on my own. I don't have to rely on a stranger or someone else to sort of guide me through that process. I can feel confident that when I run out of fluid that I don't have to panic. I don't have that moment of anxiety. So that's sort of, for me, a good analogy for the importance of understanding your diagnosis. If you know how your brain works, if you know what you're dealing with in terms of a diagnosis or a presenting concern and how that impacts your life, you're better able to take control of it and manage day to day. You're also better able to educate others about warning signs for that things aren't going well for you, or things that are helpful to do versus unhelpful, and that helps to really manage symptoms. So that's another way to self-manage, is educating others about your condition. So there's lots of different books that I recommend to clients who are able to read, and we do lend those out to clients for different diagnosis, but there's also tip sheets that I provide them in order to do that, or we have conversations in the appointments. Sometimes I recommend groups to families, couples, so a partner of someone who's been recently diagnosed, for example, to follow up with to get that education. Locally in Belleville, those would be two that I really recommend, is the Peer-to-Peer Support Network and NAMI. So those are good resources. Now, the third tool is monitoring. Similar to sort of understanding your condition and your presenting concern, it's important for clients to monitor if they're able to manage, because knowing the warning signs that things aren't going well or as you'd like them to be, or if they're not on track with your goals, you wouldn't know that unless you're mindful of those things and reflecting regularly. And there are various monitoring tools that I do provide clients depending on their presenting concern or the therapeutic approach that I'm using. So for bipolar disorder, for example, there's mood charting to get a quick snapshot on how their mood is for the day. Are they feeling anxious? Are they feeling irritable? How's their sleep? And how other things like drugs and alcohol fit into that. And so it allows them to make informed decisions about certain behaviors or certain experiences they might have. So if someone can look at a mood chart and say, wow, every time I smoke pot, my mood just goes off the tracks. I know I don't like when this happens, when my mood is not stable and it feels like chaos to me, so I'm going to choose not to smoke pot anymore or reduce my use or whatever the client might choose. But this monitoring allows them to make an informed decision. And those are just a few examples that I've provided there, but like I said, there are several out in the community that are very evidence-based. And I often, there's just a little note at the bottom that says be mindful of modifying the monitoring tools to fit with the person's strengths, learning style, and cognitive abilities. So I have quite a few clients, for example, who are quite artistic, don't do well with numbers or writing, so I try to modify different monitoring to meet their strengths or learning style, particularly if they do have a learning disability. That's important to know those pieces. And last but not least, there's one more after this. Reflection and meditation is another sort of another tool to encourage self-management. So reflection or introspection can look really differently. It can be that monitoring like we talked about and understanding yourself better. The meditation piece frequently refers to things like mindfulness-based stress reduction exercises, deep breathing, progressive muscle relaxation are two common ones there that are listed. And it encourages the clients really to be linked in with their bodies a little bit more. In my experience, at least, social work does really well on educating the students that take those programs on the psychosocial part of people's health. But it really doesn't focus too much on the physical aspect of things. And so this encourages clients not to forget about that, how their mental health links to their body. And this, again, there's the body scan to monitor how clients are feeling and what they're noticing in their body and that sort of thing if they choose to do these exercises. And then I also lend clients audio CDs with guided exercises so that they can work on mastering these just to reduce barriers. And the last tool here that I've listed is connecting to others. What that does is, even just if it's not a therapeutic group or support group, not geared to mental health, it allows people to decrease their social isolation as they build natural support systems.
Hi, Carla. I'm sorry to interrupt. It's Danielle. I don't know if everybody had that same problem, but for just the last few minutes, the last few sentences you said, it was very garbled and in and out. And I'm not sure if it's because you moved away from your microphone or if maybe it's just GoToWebinar having a couple of problems. But you might want to just repeat the last few sentences, if you don't mind. Okay, perfect. Yeah, I can do that. So sorry, it sounds like there was a bit of a tech issue, so the last little bit that I said there was sort of gurgly, so I'm just going to repeat that piece. One of the other tools is connection to others. And typically what we've seen here is as people decrease social isolation at the health center by joining groups that aren't even necessarily therapeutic in nature. It could be a cooking group. As they go to that, they build natural support systems. And what that does is exposes people to different ways of coping and different experiences. And that in itself is excellent, is an excellent tool for self-management because often in groups that I've seen, people can see themselves in others. And if there's someone in the group that a participant looks up to and says, wow, I'd really like to deal with my depression the way they do, or I really wish I had a hold on my anxiety like Sally does, that can be really, really rewarding and sort of steer clients in certain directions in their one-to-one work with a therapist or counselor. So, so that's sort of a snapshot of the initial session and some tools. As clients continue counseling, there are some things that a social worker can do to encourage the client to continue to be in charge of their care. So one thing that I always do with clients in the initial appointment that I didn't mention is I set the expectation that at the start of the appointment we'll just kind of check in with an agenda of what we want to talk about today, and always put that out to the client first.
Now, if I walk out into the weight room, for example, and someone is tearful or appears distressed, or is having an argument on the phone with someone, because we have had that a couple times here at the health center, I check in with them about their presentation and say, wow, you look really upset today. Do you want to talk about what was going on out there in the waiting room? It would be unhelpful, I think, therapeutically to ignore that piece. So it's up to the client whether or not they want to explore that, but ultimately I do put it out there. Another thing that I do is just ask that question, like I mentioned before we set the agenda today, is there anything that you wanted to discuss? I've had clients who have left an appointment, had something happen like a house fire, where they lost all their belongings, and when they come back in for the next appointment, the last thing they want to talk about is a referral I've made to a community agency for them that's a lower priority. What they would like to do, or in this case what that client wanted to do, is they wanted to address that they had no resources right now. All of their items had been damaged in this house fire. So that is a helpful check-in. And then the last question as well is just another way to ask the client to think of what sticks out for them to sort of to keep on track with the counseling that you've already done. So thinking back to our last appointment, what do you remember stuck out for you? What stuck out for me, what I think is the key thing from the last appointment that I hope that the client took with them, may not be what they took with them. It might be something else entirely. That's not to say that I just sort of toss out what my contribution to the agenda is. It's just it's helpful to allow the client to steer the agenda more in their direction by asking that question, which reduces some concerns. So I wanted to include some key indicators at the end of how you know you're more or less on track with self-management when supporting a client. And so if you, as are a social worker and you're working harder than your client, actually if you're virtually most professions who are in the helping field and you're working harder than your client, that is I would encourage you to look at that a little bit more about why that's happening. And then the other piece is non-compliant clients. So that word gets tossed around a lot. And the way I guess I've been trained to look at that is that, are the clients not compliant, or is it just I'm not speaking their language? Because those are very different things. Perhaps what I'm suggesting in terms of treatment or a resource is not at all where they're at, or it doesn't fit their needs. And so it just means that you have to go back and look at the why, and not take it on as they're trying to, I don't know, make your day harder or something like that. And so then it usually comes down to you might be missing something in the full picture of their lives, or just not, like I said, not speaking their language. And last but not least, there are unique challenges to, although working as part of a team is great, and that team can extend beyond your agency into the community with interagency care. As you bring more people in, it can get more complicated. And when you're dealing with a client whose healthcare needs are already complicated, that's a huge challenge. Often clients get lost in that and their needs and their wants, because they're getting lots of different messages that could be conflicting from lots of different agencies. Agencies with different philosophies and that sort of thing. So what I tend to do is, in those cases, is care conference. I've heard them referred to as case conference, but I just consider it more humane and more keeps clients' dignity more intact if I refer to it as a care conference instead. So in a care conference, I usually do those with client present if they're comfortable. And what I encourage them to do in collaboration with me is set a list of invitees and set a list of goals for the day. And then we draft an agenda that looks very similar to this. So John Doe here's care conference agenda would bring all his supports to the table. We talk about who does what, just so everybody's on the same page, and any boundaries of involvement. We would talk about John's goals, what has been met, what still needs to be done, and a priority, and then walk away with a plan of care. So that's pretty much it for me. I'm not sure if anybody has any questions.
Sorry about that. I was on mute for a second. No questions have come in throughout the presentation, but if anybody is interested in asking anything now, you can either enter in the chat, or since we're a small group today, I'll actually unmute everyone for just a moment. So let me do that right now. So did anybody have any questions or comments for Carla at all? You can just speak up if you do. All right, so I guess nobody has any immediate questions. If ever you have a question after the webinar is finished, so you're like, oh shoot, I completely forgot to ask that, or if you're looking over the materials that you can download from our website and you think, oh, I want a little more details on that, feel free to email me at that selfmanagement@kchc.ca email that's in all of your reminder emails. And if I can't get the answer for you directly, I will contact Carla and have her provide it to me, and I can either send it to the whole group or just the person that asked, or even just send her contact information to you directly if she finds she'd rather have a bit more of a discussion one-on-one. So just keep in mind that that's a possibility too. So if, Carla, do you have any final comments at all or questions yourself for the group?
Not particularly. I am very grateful to have the opportunity to share my experiences with everyone today, and I hope it was helpful. It is very general, and there's not necessarily the very specific tools in all cases that I could provide, and I think that's because our clients aren't so specific and textbook in all cases. So thank you for your patience and your attendance.
Excellent. So in that case, I'm just going to thank everybody for attending our 7th webinar. We hope that you found it beneficial and that you enjoyed it. Also, there will be a follow-up email going out tomorrow, an automated email of sorts. And in there you'll find links where a recording of this webinar will be available on our website. It'll likely get posted early next week this time, however. But if you follow that link next week, you'll be able to watch it again if you like. It's also a link to where the materials can be downloaded if you didn't have a chance to do so ahead of time. And there'll also be a link to our calendar posting for the upcoming Choices and Changes in Smith Falls if you or a colleague are interested in attending that. So you'll find all that info in the follow-up email tomorrow. So again, thank you everybody for coming, and thank you very much, Carla, for the presentation. It was quite interesting. And have a wonderful day, everyone.